Hi everyone, it's Dr. Cindy here. Welcome back to part 2 of our repetitive strain injuries workshops. Today will be part 2 looking at the lower body. So without further ado, I'll start sharing my screen. Alrighty. So, welcome and thank you for those who have joined tonight. Otherwise, if you're watching from YouTube, hello to you too. So I'm Cindy, I'm a chiropractor at Provolution Health in Queanbeyan, and today we'll be talking about repetitive strain injuries of the lower body. So obviously, let's start off with what exactly is a repetitive strain injury. It's actually also known as RSI for short. So RSI is a gradual buildup of damage to muscles, tendons, and nerves from repetitive motions. And it can involve all parts of the body, most commonly the peripherals, including the shoulders, elbows, forearms, and wrists, hands, and fingers. But today we'll be looking at the hips, knees, ankles, feet, and toes. So common signs and symptoms that occur are pain, tenderness, swelling, stiffness, throbbing or weakness, but also when the nerves get involved, you can also have some numbness, tingling or pins and needles as well. So before we talk about some of the common conditions of in the hips, the knees, and the ankles, I'd like to talk about a bit of anatomy. So a bit of anatomy of the lower body. We have here the lumbar spine. We have 5 vertebrae. So if you look at my mouse, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You then have underneath your low back spine, it's the base of your spine, which is an upside down triangle called your sacrum. And then here you have your pelvis, this part called the ilium. And together, the joint between your sacrum and your ilium, you get the sacroiliac joint through here. Then looking down a bit further, from your ilium, you get your hip joint. So your hip is that ball and it falls into that socket. And then you get your femur, your leg, goes down into your knee joint, comes down more. You get your ankle joint, which connects your lower leg to your feet. And then you have your feet and toes. So the root cause of lower body repetitive strain injuries is essentially poor posture. And a fancy word for poor posture of the lower body is lower cross syndrome. In a lower cross syndrome, essentially there'll be a tight muscle at the front, a weak muscle group at the front, and also the same tight, and one group that's tight and one group that's weak at the back. So you can see in this picture that in people with poor posture, you'd find that they have weak core, weak abs, and then they'll also have weak glutes, so weak buttocks. But then in saying that, they'll have tight hip flexors and hip quads at the front, and then a tight low back. This photo doesn't demonstrate it just as well, but essentially what you'll be seeing is more of this kind of posture where their back is swayed. So like this, and then it's weak core, tight back. And then you can see as well with this photo, you have the poor posture in the upper body as well. All right, so that is the root cause. So if you have a poor posture and lower cross syndrome, it means that you haven't got a good foundation to begin with, and then plus the repetitive motions, that's when injuries can occur. Because if you think about it, that you may have some people, say for example, a dancer, if you line up 10 people who do the same a job, but not all of them will have the same injury. And another thing that doesn't help and influences this is the fact that sitting is the new smoking. So there has been an unbelievable amount of research that's come out recently that showing that sitting has affect your health, your longevity, and all body systems. So including cardiovascular, your respiratory system, and including your nervous system. And your nervous system is what's used to help you heal. So sitting doesn't help, and it leads to the poor posture and then bad setup for the RSI. So the first condition I'll be talking about today is snapping hip syndrome. So what snapping hip syndrome is when if you move your hip, I'll show you like this, you'll hear a click or a pop, and that sound it comes from one of 2 muscles. So one muscle could be the ITB, which runs along the side of the hip here, and it flicks over when it's tight over this greater trochanter, the bony part of the side of your hip. Or alternatively, when your hip flexor, your iliopsoas muscle is tight and it snaps over this part here, which is the front crest of your ilium. Now, most of the time, it's actually not really painful, but sometimes it can be. And a lot of the time, if you want to address the snapping hip syndrome, you have to look deeper as to why these muscles even tight in the first place. And it's often a result from repetitive motions of lots of squatting, bending up and down, and then there's a local injury that's causing the muscles to become tight. So for example, the person could have a back injury, and to compensate, their muscles are getting tighter, which is leading to the snapping hip syndrome. The next injury we'll be looking at is jumper's knee. So jumper's knee is a common repetitive strain injury in the knee. So the pain occurs as a result of tendonitis, which is inflammation of the tendon, in this case, the patellar tendon, which is what connects your kneecap into your shin bone. And there's jumper's knee can be either acute or chronic, right? So when it's acute, there'll be starts off with lots of small tears, and then it would cause obviously pain and inflammation, even swelling, and a lot of lack of mobility. But over time, jumper's knee can actually be something that's chronic. It often happens as a result of obviously lots of jumping motions, where there's a constant load onto the tendon, and it can actually lead to rather a constant dull or even burning pain that feels like just under the kneecap. So this is from repetitive loading, but if you have the right foundation, like going back to the good core and glutes, if you have strong glutes, you'll be able to distribute the weight better and you won't be loading the knee as much. Next is the ankle. We're moving down the chain. So ankle sprains and strains. So I want to differentiate the two first of all. So a sprain is something that happens that's a bit more acute. So let's say you're walking and you accidentally trip over your shoelaces, you're playing basketball, you're playing football, soccer, and you find that your foot accidentally bends in, which is more common, or it can either bend out. What happens is in a sprain, you can either tear the ligaments or partially tear the ligaments in your ankle that helps stabilize it. And often it will swell up quite soon. There may even be some bruising. It'll be hard for you to weight bear and put pressure on. But if you follow the basic RICE rules, which is when you rest, ice, compress, and elevate, the ankle sprain in itself should heal up quite just fine without really needing any further help, assuming that it's not completely torn. What we often find though is once someone's sprains their ankle just once, they'll often their ankle will be unstable, and because they haven't done the right rehab to regain the strength and proper mobility, they'll then have a chronic strain in their ankle, particularly of the peroneal tendon. So the peroneal tendon is a tendon on the outer side of the foot. This is more common in people who have what we call inversion sprains, when the foot goes in, and that tendon, when it's inflamed, it can lead to that chronic dull pain, even though the ankle in itself isn't no longer swollen and the ligaments are actually a lot better. So if we take it back down a notch, what causes ankle sprains and strains? Sometimes it's just bad luck, or just an accident, but more often than not, it's because of poor feet positioning. So, and this comes, I'll talk about in a moment, but it actually comes from the back. But let's just take a look here at the ankle. So in a neutral and a healthy foot, you'll see that the leg is quite straight. But if the foot is pronated coming out, then you'll see an ankle, the leg starting to bow out. Similarly, if the foot is supinated, you'll see it start to come in. Okay. But what causes the foot to be either pronated or supinated often is determined from the sacroiliac joint. So as I was saying earlier, the sacroiliac joint is the joint in between your sacrum, which is the base of your spine. That's the lowest vertebrae there, and also your pelvis, which is your ilium. So sacroiliac joint, which is right here. When there's joint dysfunction, it can influence the positioning of the feet, because this joint can either go forward and back when you sit, and also go in and out. So there's four main motions: forward, back, in, and out. And when that happens, it can alter obviously the pelvis, which carries the hip, and the hip, if you work it down, it connects to your legs and your feet. And so that's where the ankle and foot positioning comes from. More often than not, when I have patients who have just sprained their ankle, then I actually give them a heads up and a warning that, look, to some extent, you may actually develop lower back pain as a result of the sacroiliac joint just not being able to load properly, because there'll be compensation factors. The body isn't going to want to wait there on the ankle. Or alternatively, I give them a heads up that, you know, after I adjust them, their pelvis and their sacroiliac joint isn't necessarily going to be functioning as good as we'd like for as long as we'd like. And that's because as soon as they stand up with gravity in the picture, then the loading occurs again, leading to the dysfunction in the joint. But assuming that a person's ankle is no longer in an acute sprain, and if they've got a chronic strain rather instead, and tendonitis in the peroneal tendon, it's important we start looking at, okay, how are the patient's feet turning, as well as what's the joint movement like in the sacroiliac joint. So if we add this all up together, one of the things that you can really easily test to see, are you going to be more prone to developing an RSI injury in your hip, your knees, or your ankles, is to see whether or not you can do a good squat. So a good squat is child's play. So let's start from the top. When you look at these kids when they squat, their head is upright so they can look forward. Their back is also straight and solid. Their chest is up in an upright position, and then their hips are below the knee so that their body can balance well. Their knees are over and tracking their toes, knees apart, but then the feet are shoulder width apart, so a bit further out, toes pointing out, and the feet are flat on the floor with the weight on the heels so that it can be equally distributed. So if you can do a good squat, or, you know, a child squat, or I dare say even an ethnic squat, then you're more likely to have better joint motion and be unlikely susceptible to RSI injuries. So we've spoken about so far some common RSI injuries, and you're probably wondering, if you're experiencing RSI, what can you do? So my opinion, there's 4 main steps that will make a big difference. So the first is obviously break bad habits. I think for some people, the nature of their job, they have no choice but to do the repetitive motions. However, if you investigate and look closely, sometimes there could be bad habits in the way. And so it's important that if you have to do the motion, let's just make the most of the situation and break the bad habits. Because often repetitive motions happen over time. People can then start to get even unconsciously lazy, and then start to cheat, and that leads to bad habits, which then leads to the injuries. You want to be adding specific exercises. So what exercises? I mean, if you saw any musculoskeletal health practitioner, like a chiropractor or a physio, there are plenty of exercises to be given. But if I were to hone it down, I think it's important that we take it back to the root cause, which is lower cross syndrome. So the muscles that are weak, you want to be strengthening, and the muscles that are tight, you want to be stretch. So I recently discovered these GIFs, which is really exciting, which means I don't have to jump all the way back on the table to demonstrate. But I wanted to show you 2 great exercises I often recommend to my patients to help with their core as well as their hips, their glutes. So the dead bug here is a great exercise you can do to improve your core. Think about it like when you kill a cockroach, you spray it and it's laying on the floor, you know, with arms and legs up. So you're going to start in this position with your arms and legs up, arms straight, legs at 90 degrees. And what you're going to do is you're going to straighten the opposite arm and opposite leg, bring it back, and then hold it for 1 second, and then bring it back to the center. Once you're at the center, then you can straighten the other arm and the other leg. So if you just look at this movement, right arm, left arm. So it's opposite arm and opposite leg. So think of this exercise, if we were to turn it around, right? Think of it like your body is like a table. I often use this analogy. So a table has 4 legs. If you take 2 legs out, possibly the table may still be able to balance, although not great, but if there's a good core in the middle, it will still hold. And so when you're doing this exercise, it's not the muscles of the leg and arm that you're moving that's working, but rather the ones that are staying still, because those muscles, the opposite ones, have to hold and contract to keep you upright. This exercise is mostly for core, as you can see, but it's also a great exercise to help you build your coordination as well. If you find that this exercise is too challenging, you can technically switch it up and just imagine that photo, turn it around. You're going to go on all fours and bring back straighten the opposite arm and opposite leg. So the next strengthening exercise I recommend for my patients to strengthen their glutes is the hip thrust. So what the hip thrust is, you don't need any machine or any weight, although if you do put some weight, it will be a bit harder. But essentially, you can just use a chair or the couch or a bench, and you're going to rest your elbows and arms and shoulders up on the bench, and you're going to have your legs out. Put a band around your knees. That way that you can activate your glutes a bit more. Important that the toes are a bit out, and essentially you're going to thrust up. So when you come all the way up, that's when you squeeze your glutes and activate it even further. If you want to make it more challenging, you can put either a dumbbell or a plate or even a barbell right across the front there. The third thing is you want to be doing self-care. So if you're having an acute injury, that's when you really want to be icing the inflammation and tenderness. That way it doesn't become a chronic condition. But foam rolling is really good as well. Stretching and strengthening, which I was speaking about earlier. If you go on YouTube or search up, there are plenty of stretches out there, but the ones that you want to be targeting if you have RSI in the lower body is your hip flexors, your quads, as well as your low back. Last but not least, you want to be getting adjusted, or at least checked by a chiropractor to see if you need to be adjusted. And I'm not saying this because I'm a chiropractor, but rather there is a reason why, and it's rather because at the end of the day, we know that our nervous system controls our whole body, and we know that the hips, knees, ankles, and feet problems, if you trace back the nerve supply, it comes from the low back, from L3 to L5. So if you see here, these nerve roots that come down, it forms into one nerve and branches into further nerves that supplies your whole entire lower limb. So more often than not, when we see people with, sometimes when we see people with buttock pain or weakness in the leg, it really can sometimes stem from purely the low back. Sometimes it's coming from the bone, but sometimes it's coming from the disc. So if there's a disc injury, it can impact the nerve. But at the end of the day, it's the nerve that controls everything. And so that leads me to the end. And I want to let everyone know that health, it's not just all about how you feel, right? Sometimes our nerves take time to let us know, but we actually, function is the biggest thing that we assess. And that I want to remind everyone that your body has the potential and the power to heal, only if you give it the chance to. So if you really enjoyed today's workshop, don't forget to, like the video, comment if you have any questions, or alternatively, if you want to speak to myself or Marcus in the practice, you can reach out to us via our contact phone number at 6299 2660. If you also enjoyed the video, the workshop, If you're interested in more educational content, head to Facebook and give us a like and subscribe to us on YouTube, and there's plenty more to come. All right, that's all. Thank you, everyone.